William Shakespeare.
Shakespeare!
Shakespeare.
Shakespeare.
Shakespeare!
You have not experienced Shakespeare until you have read him in the original Klingon.
This is not Shakespeare.
Oh, I did Shakespeare in the park, Max. I got mugged.
It has been 400 years since his death, and the world is still his stage. Why? His plays were written for a world far removed from our own. The politicians are no longer kings. We watch movies, not plays, and we write tweets, not letters. So surely, his plays cannot translate directly to us. How could they? We are so different. Well, yes, but actually, no. If I ask you to think about a drunk leader, sure, many examples from today could come to mind. But who else could? Macbeth, King Claudius. Why would these centuries-old characters be so prevalent, even ubiquitous with the character type? The world may look very different from the way it did during the Elizabethan era, but we are just the same as we have always been. Shakespeare's masterful adaptation of timeless stories. His plots that take influence from age-old Greek tragedies. His characters that show a better understanding of the human condition than any other writer of the time or since. His gorgeously complex language that always manages to perfectly explain the intended message. These are the reasons why Shakespeare influenced the world in such a huge way. Shakespeare's works are almost entirely borrowed, coming from history, mythology, and other tales from long before Shakespeare put pen to paper. These are enduring translations of the same problems that we have been dealing with since the dawn of civilization. Shakespeare's contemporary, Ben Jonson, wrote, "Shakespeare's work was not of an age but for all time, which has proved prescient." Shakespeare's relevance is ageless as long as humans exist because he grasped the human psyche better than any other writer of his day. He wrestled with the most complex themes imaginable: murder, love, ambition, betrayal, revenge, and hatred. He constantly challenges our prejudices, beliefs, and assumptions. Richard III's power plays reflect our postmodern predicament, and Twelfth Night's exploration of gender norms and expectations reflects our culture's struggle with the gender binary. These plays have managed to speak complicated truths to all manner of audiences and readers for hundreds of years. Shakespeare portrays the most complex themes of human life with such ease and prowess. The way Shakespeare depicts murder, ambition, love, revenge, betrayal, and hatred are both of his time and for all time. The fact that his plays are based on stories that have been told for ages makes them more than topical, more than of their own time. They can teach about the politics and the psychology of our current moment, about the intricacies of hubris and the fluidity of desire, the perils of blind ambition and the joys of true connection. Our experiences concerning everything from gender, family and political intrigue to fame, race and class are nimbly and memorably explored in Shakespeare's plays. His characters are uniquely three-dimensional. They are multifaceted creations that react and adapt to the problems they face. His characters are ones we identify with. We understand Hamlet's despondency. We recognize Othello's envy. We feel Lear's decline. These characters are, at once, types and revelations. Shakespeare's characters are familiar, and at the same time they surprise us out of our complacency, and in this way, they are endlessly fascinating. Shakespeare seemed to intensely feel what his characters felt, whether they were good or evil. He created characters that are powerful because they seem so alive. Their struggles and emotions are completely heartfelt. They behave consistently as if they are real people. They draw us in with their deeply felt desires. Shakespeare doesn't simply put flat words into his characters' mouths. The words he uses are so memorable that they stick with us. He's never afraid of a pun or a metaphor. Juliet, for example, is not simply beautiful. She sparkles like a jewel against an ear. Ophelia is not simply naive for believing that Hamlet's affections are true, but she is a baby for it. Shakespeare created deeply complicated characters who are unforgivably evil, heartbreakingly tragic, extraordinarily heroic, psychologically developed, and instantly recognizable. He conveys thoughts and feelings of our human behavior in a way that is often inexpressible and indefinable to us through a combination of poetry, prose, and blank verse. The works of Shakespeare are hilarious, pithy, and emotional. He was a master when it came to imbuing his characters and stories with qualities and traits that the readers and audiences identify with. The love between Juliet and Romeo, the anguish that Hamlet felt, Macbeth's craziness, the distress of Ophelia. We can relate with all of these at some points in our lives. His characters depict the emotions of common humanity. Our beliefs, assumptions, and prejudices are constantly challenged by Shakespeare. Characters and situations depicted in Shakespeare's works offer a profound look into problems and themes of our human condition. From Hamlet's soliloquy to Romeo and Juliet's balcony scene, which were very psychologically pointed. They provide insights into the human mind and describe a wide range of feelings and reactions to situations in life. They often address directly, bluntly, some of the greatest questions mankind has ever posed itself. They hate, love, cheat, and act irrationally, fueled by their emotions. They are often victims of their own desires and impulses. In all their faceted personalities and contradictions, they feel. That is why they appear and appeal to us as deeply human. Have you ever said with bated breath, that something is the be-all and the end-all, or that you wanted to break the ice? Have you asked, knock, knock, who's there? If so, you have quoted Shakespeare. If for no other reason, students today should study Shakespeare simply to appreciate how much of our daily discourse we owe to his wordsmithery. If you've ever said green-eyed monster, in a pickle, tongue-tied, wild goose chase, cruel to be kind, hoodwinked, to wear one's heart on one's sleeve, it's Greek to me. The clothes make the man, forever and a day, or any of these other now common sayings. You've cited Shakespeare. His turns of phrase were unconventional and ingenious, and they've now become so ingrained in the English language that they seem to be beyond coinage. We're so steeped in Shakespeare that we're not even aware of it anymore. He was a deft crafter of the English language, and his metaphors have made each of us all richer as readers and writers. If you look up the roots of many words in the Oxford English Dictionary, you'd see that Shakespeare is identified several times as the first user of a phrase or a word. He is credited with the first written use, popularization, or first use of around 1700 words and phrases that have subsequently become established as common phrases in the English language. Allusions to Shakespeare show up everywhere, from popular writers like Agatha Christie, Charles Dickens, Christopher Moore, and John Green. It's good to study Shakespeare because he is a window into so many writers after him. The reach of the playwright is extensive, and people from all over the globe and all walks of life have read him, watched his plays, or have at least watched screen adaptations of his work. Shakespeare is woven into the fabric of the English language. Yet, when you ask the average person about Shakespeare, most have an ambivalent relationship. There are even teachers, department heads, and school boards advocating to take Shakespeare out of the English curriculum entirely, as some suggest it's not relevant today and difficult for students to understand. The solution to this, and an important part of Shakespeare, is to learn by doing. Hamlet is not a novel to be read silently. It is a play meant to be heard and spoken aloud. It's no surprise then, that when a teenager today reads the book and sees the words arranged in foreign blocks, it can feel strange. The problem isn't Shakespeare, it's how it's taught. But with every book or play we read in school, we also inherit how we've learned it. In the case of Shakespeare, we've inherited a static and often boring approach to understanding an oral tradition. Imagine studying songs and music by only reading lyrics. The content is there, but the spirit is not. There are 27 moons of the planet Uranus, as a testament to his influence. Many of them have been named after famous characters from Shakespeare's plays such as Puck, Oberon, Titania, Miranda, Ariel, Caliban, et. One might even say that his influence has become cosmic. Shakespeare's likeness was first used as a logotype in 1710 by Jacob Tunson for his bookshop. Since then, the strength of Shakespeare as a brand has continued to grow, and his influence is ubiquitous. His work and likeness have been used to sell everything from cigarettes to computers and from chocolates to beers. Translated into over 100 languages, even Klingon, Shakespeare's work continues to influence readers and spectators worldwide, making him an author studied by over 50% of the world's children today. In the 1960s, while an imprisoned Nelson Mandela was reading passages from Shakespeare, and Tanzania's first president Julius Nyerere was donating the first translation into Swahili to his nation, Bollywood was at its peak, with many of its films being directly based on the bard's work. The widespread international popularity ultimately led to the World Shakespeare Festival of 2012, in which productions from 50 countries staged his works in 38 languages at the Globe Theatre in London. It was just the beginning. In 2014, 450 years after Shakespeare's birth, a whole host of celebrations took place in the UK and abroad, with 2016 marking the 400th anniversary of his death. A renewed wave of festivals took place worldwide over the whole course of the year. If you need any more proof that William Shakespeare has always been and will always stay relevant, look no further than the theatre's most modern medium, film. The bard's plays have been performed in front of the camera since its invention. The Internet Movie Database lists Shakespeare as having a writing credit in 1,140 films. This makes him the most filmed author of all time. In any language, that's quite a feat for a man who died a good 300 years before feature films had been invented. When Shakespeare wrote them, it was incredibly rare that plays would be read like a novel. People experienced the plays live. On the other hand, today we more often experience these plays in our own minds in a solitary act of reading. We attribute a lot to the words on the paper. But Shakespeare's audience, who were primed for his language and allusions in a manner that we aren't, was more invested in the live entertainment being produced in front of them. That disconnect between live performance and in our mind's eye can make studying the bard's work even harder. But teaching his work in a way that is relatable to today's current events can bring his fascinating work to life and make it easier to understand. He wrote for live audiences, and his plays were made to be performed. Plays also provide ample material for analysis in a classroom setting, but our experience of his work should also include watching the plays performed. Students also can draw from their own experiences as high school students who watch the plays. We can explore what these previous viewings mean in light of what they're learning now, or how they can see the issues raised in these recordings in terms of how we view politics and political machinations in our own time. One high school teacher recently caused an uproar by dropping Shakespeare from her lesson plan as she thought it was irrelevant to her students. Others tried to connect their pupils with his plays by studying the characters and their motivations as if they were real people. Actors and directors have done the same. Performances today include radical departures from the script, especially in international productions that may not feel limited by the famous language. One version interviewed middle school students about Romeo and Juliet and acted out the responses, while another, Sleep No More, was staged in a warehouse. As audience members walked around the set, they'd realized that the story was Macbeth, presented out of order and mostly unspoken. The plays feel alive and present, but were created at a particular moment in English and European history, and they mean something in that context. We want it to be relevant, but it is also important to understand that it's different from you, and that difference is interesting. With in-depth analysis, it is surprising. Some of the things that are happening in the plays and the strangeness of the Shakespearean world. Scholars say that most Europeans at that time still believed in the one-sex model, that women and men had the same sex organs but inverted. That meant that women and men were actually not so different, and theoretically, women could become men and men women. So when Lady Macbeth says, "Unsex me here," she might mean that literally. Sexual norms were also different, with same-sex activities not specifically defined as gay or lesbian, and rape prosecuted as a property crime. The Shakespearean world is not just this exciting and interesting and liberating world. It's a very disturbing and troubling and upsetting world in a lot of ways. Instead of using history to contextualize Shakespeare, some use Shakespeare to teach history. Richard III is a great play. Henry VIII is not. But both are great historical pieces. Both works give a positive picture of the Tudors who ruled England. When Elizabeth I is born in Henry VIII, she is presented as a heaven-sent princess. Shakespeare always had an eye to contemporary politics. Not just to curry favor, but to give warnings. Richard III sends messages about what is legal and moral and what is not. Video games have something to tell us about how tragedy works because they bring out the idea of being able to manipulate and control action and time, which is the heart of any classical tragedy, while historical context is important. I'm also arguing that contemporary media can tell us something about the works of the past. This is all the more striking if we consider the time Shakespeare lived in, an era in which status was paramount, where laws established which colors and fabrics people were allowed to wear according to their class, where people had to abide by defined moral behaviors, and where executions and violence were a common sight. The historical setting provides a great contrast to the fictional world of Shakespeare's production, where characters are to a certain extent free to explore and express their feelings, all while their stories and realities frame their experiences with a moral backdrop. Shakespeare's works are still studied because they are regarded as some of the most skillfully crafted and elegantly poetic works in the history of literature. In addition to the quality of his work, Shakespeare is revered for his ability to portray timeless themes of human experience that have continued to be relevant long after his death. Shakespeare's plays and poems continue to captivate us because his storylines ring true, his characters leave an indelible impression, and his language constantly moves and surprises us. Anyone can relate to the feelings evoked by his stories. Shakespeare's characters are complex, his language is gorgeous, and the themes love, honor, betrayal, envy, jealousy, fear, pride, lust, grief are all issues that matter to us today. His influence over Western and world culture, literature, and the English language has been so significant that it is important to have an understanding of Shakespeare to understand the modern world.